Shavua Tov, everybody. I hope you had an amazing Shabbat, an inspiring Shabbat. And now I'd like to share with you a couple more insights, continuing on in our series, our mini-series on Pirkey Avot. We're going to continue on, and we're going to discuss today some insights from Perek Bet, from the second chapter, as we start making our way closer and closer to the holiday of Shavuot and Matan Torah and the reception of the Torah. So, in this week's Perek, in this week's chapter, we learned something very interesting. In the first Mishnah, he says, Rebbe Omer, he continues on and he says, "V'hevei zayir b'mitzvah kala keva hamura, she'en ata yodea matan seharan shel mitzvot." A person has to be very careful with a seemingly light mitzvah, just like he is with a seemingly more severe mitzvah, because we don't know what the reward for each mitzvah is. Meaning, a person cannot take two mitzvot and weigh them against each other and say this mitzvah is more important than that mitzvah, or vice versa, and therefore I'm going to spend all my time only involved in this mitzvah and I'm not going to involve myself in other mitzvot. But also, another way of looking at it is a person has to be careful not to look at the mitzvah like it's kala or it's hamura. We shouldn't look at our mitzvot and compare them and start comparing ourselves to others and their mitzvot and think, the mitzvah that I do, what benefit is it? I'm so far from Hashem, I'm so far from His Torah. When I do a small mitzvah, if I put on tefillin one time, or if I say the prayers and I don't really know what I'm saying, what difference does it make? My prayers are not like Moshe Rabbeinu's, my prayers are not like the big rabbis. My putting on tefillin, I don't have all the proper intentions. Maybe I will look at myself and I'll look at my mitzvot like they're not so important. In fact, if somebody would have these thoughts, it wouldn't be the first time someone had them. There was a big rabbi. His name was Rabbi Chaim Vital. He was the student, the primary disciple of the Arizal HaKadosh. The famous father of all of the Kabbalah that we have today comes from the Arizal HaKadosh. Rabbi Chaim Vital was his primary disciple, his main student. And Rabbi Chaim Vital once came, it's told, to the Arizal, and he said to his Rebbe, my father, my Rebbe, his spiritual father, he tells him, I'm feeling very depressed, I'm feeling very down. So the Arizal tells him, why are you feeling so down? So Rabbi Chaim Vital responds, I look at the stories in the Mishnah and in the Gemara about the big rabbis of prior generations, and I will never even reach their toes. I will never even reach the level of their feet. That's how far above me they are in their level of spirituality. What good is it, all of the things that I'm doing? I'm never even going to come close to reaching the levels that prior generations have reached. And because of that, he was very despondent. So the Arizal tells Rabbi Chaim Vital, you should not be concerned like that. He says, on the contrary, think back in their generation how easy it was. They didn't have all of the temptations that we have in our generation. In our generation, the temptation to get involved in sin is so much worse. They didn't get involved in those things. And so for them to sit all day and study Torah, to be honest in business, how much business did they even do? The stores were closed at night. They basically spent their whole day in Torah study. The whole community, everybody was involved in Torah study. Everybody was very involved in spirituality. Jews, non-Jews, the whole world was spiritual. So in a generation like that, to spend your life studying Torah, you're doing what everybody else is doing. It's not so difficult. But says the Arizal to Reb Chaim Vital, when you go and you do mitzvot in our generation, that's powerful. When you do that, all of the malachim and shamayim, all of the angels, they cheer for you and they get excited. If that's true of Reb Chaim Vital, who was 600 years ago, how much more so for us in our generation can we say the same thing? In our generation, with all of the temptations, everything available at our fingertips, on iPhones and on our computers, we can do damage that they couldn't have even dreamed of. By writing one poor comment on social media about one of our friends, to write something not so nice about them, in a moment, thousands of people can see what we wrote. In their generation, in order to do Lashon Hara, to say gossip, to 1,000 people. They used to have to go door to door. Imagine how much more damage we could do today. And if that's the case, how much more so the other way. When we go away from all of the temptations in our world, when we go away and push ourselves away from all of the influences that are around us, and instead we involve ourselves in doing mitzvah, somebody who puts tefillin on even once in his life can take pride in that huge mitzvah that he put tefillin on, that he made a prayer, that he made a beracha. That's the thing that we learn. Haveh zayir b'mitzvah kala kiv'hamura. You should treat a mitzvah kala like it is hamura. Treat a light mitzvah like it's a very serious mitzvah, because we don't know the reward. We can't make these comparisons and judge ourselves against other people and other generations. All we can do is do our best to try and fulfill our potential. There is a famous story also that shows you we don't know the reward of mitzvot, of how powerful they are. It's a story told of the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel was the head treasurer in Spain. He was the treasurer of the king. He was the financier. He was the CFO of the government. And the Abarbanel was very despised by some of the other ministers. They were very jealous of him. Here is this Jewish rabbi who is serving, as a high minister and in charge of all of the king's treasures. And they were very jealous of this. And so one time there was a minister who tried to come up with a plan where he was going to trick the Abarbanel. His plan was that he was going to go and get some secrets that the Abarbanel had about the treasures that he was not supposed to give to anybody. So he bribed the Abarbanel's servant, and the Abarbanel's servant went and stole some papers from the Abarbanel's office, and he gave these papers to this other minister. This other minister then went to the king, and he told the king, this Jew, Abarbanel, Don Yitzhak, he is not honest. He told me all of the secrets, and he starts revealing to the king secrets about the king's treasures. The king gets very upset. He decides he is going to get rid of the Abarbanel. He says the Abarbanel and himself were the only people that should have known those secrets. So if this other minister knew these secrets, it meant that the Abarbanel had given off his secrets. So the king decides he's going to put the Abarbanel to death. But he had a problem. The Abarbanel was very loved in the kingdom. He had lowered taxes on the people. He had encouraged the people. He had made the economy in Spain boom. He was a great economist. And so because of that, the king was worried if he would publicly put the Abarbanel to death, everybody would know about it. They would get very angry, and perhaps he would have a rebellion on his hands. So he came up with a plan. He wrote a letter to the Abarbanel. He wrote a letter to a far-off place where they had they would make bricks, and they had like a big furnace there where they would make the bricks. And he wrote a letter, and he wrote in the letter to the head of this factory that whoever gives you this letter, immediately, by order of the king, throw him into the furnace and kill him. And he puts this letter into an envelope and seals it, and he gives it to the Abarbanel. And he tells him, I want you to go to such and such factory and give this to the head of the factory. So the Abarbanel takes the letter. He does not know what's inside. And he gets in his wagon with his trusted servant who had betrayed him. And he gets in the wagon and he starts traveling. Along the way, they come to a fork in the road. And they see there's a Jewish man on the side of the road. And he's waving down. Everybody recognized the Abarbanel's wagon. He starts waving him down. So the Abarbanel stops the wagon and he says, what's going on? How can I help you? So the man says, my son is 8 days old. We're supposed to do the circumcision today. But the mohel didn't arrive. And I don't want to push off the milah until the next day. I want to do the circumcision on the day it's supposed to be. And I know that the Abarbanel, I know that you are a great mohel. You're world famous that you are a mohel. You could perform this mitzvah of circumcision. Please come and do the circumcision for my son. So now the Abarbanel had to make a calculation. Does he go do this mitzvah of circumcision, or does he fulfill the decree of the king? So the Abarbanel says, you know what? He gives the letter to his trusted servant, who had betrayed him. And he tells him, you continue on and get to the factory, and I'm going to go and do this Brit Milah. I'm going to perform the mitzvah of circumcision, and then I will meet you there, and I'll go by foot. So the wagon continues on with the servant holding the letter, and the Abarbanel gets off and he goes and performs the mitzvah of circumcision. After he performs the mitzvah, he goes and continues on to the factory, and he gets to the factory and he finds that his servant was killed. He says, what's going on? So the head of the factory says that he opened the letter and he reveals to the Abarbanel that inside the letter it said to throw whoever gave this letter into the furnace. The Abarbanel is shocked. The factory person tells him, before I threw him in the furnace, I had to know what he did. So I interrogated him and tortured him. And he revealed to me what he did, that he betrayed you and everything like that. And he wrote a letter to the king. Abarbanel went back to the king. And the king, when he realized this, he said, wow, God is watching over you. Please, I want you to continue on ruling as the minister. And from now on, I'm not gonna say anything to you. And the Abarbanel was saved, and because of that, the Abarbanel merited a very long life. We learn from there that the power of this mitzvah, of this small mitzvah, of taking the time to go do a mitzvah like circumcision on the side of the road for some random guy, even doing a mitzvah like that, it has the power to save us. It has the power to bring big merit into our lives. So especially in a time like ours where we need salvation and we need help, it's appropriate for us to involve ourselves in mitzvot and not to consider, oh, this mitzvah is too hard, this mitzvah is too light. We've got to take advantage of all of them. One more insight I'd like to share from this week is it says in the Mishnah, in Mishnah Bet, in the second Mishnah, it says, Yafeh Talmud Torah im derech eretz. That Talmud Torah, Torah study, is good together with derech eretz. Derech eretz means the way of the land. Literally means the way of the land. There are three things that our rabbis call the way of the land. One of them is, good manners, but that can't mean, that's not what it refers to here, because obviously the whole book is involving in good manners. So the other thing that it means is it can mean the way of the land is to work, business, that people have to make money, they have to make a parnasah, they have to have a livelihood. So the Torah is telling us here in this Mishnah that Yafet Talmud Torah, Torah study is good, im derech eretz, with a profession. People have to have work. There's a famous story of a very rich father who had a son, who the son was very lazy. He did not want to do any work. He didn't want to learn a profession, nothing. So the father hired a big artisan, one of the best smiths in the region, and he brings this smith in to study, to teach his son, let his son be an apprentice, and to teach him the art of making these fine dishes and fine things. Well, the son, he wasn't interested. So the father, he decides he's going to bribe his son. He says, from now on, I'm going to pay you 5 pieces of gold, and I'm going to give the teacher also pieces of gold, a lot of money, for every single day that you study, every single piece that you do. So the son, begrudgingly, he learned the trade, he learned how to become this artisan, how to become this smith, and he did it for the reward. After some time, the father died, and he left his son all of the riches. Well, the riches went to the son, and he squandered them. A few years went by, he'd spent all of the money. So the son, he didn't know what to do. After a few years, he spent all of the money. So he started to, make different products, make some dishes and stuff like that, using this trade that he had learned of how to be a smith. Well, every time he would do this, his wife noticed that every time he would make one of these dishes, when he would do this, he would start giving blessings, non-stop praising his father. It should be Le'ilui Nishmat, my father, that he taught me how to do this. He was such an amazing person and so good. All of a sudden, he's constantly blessing his father. So his wife says to him, she says, I don't get it. When you had 3 years, we were living off all of the money that he left you, the big fortune that he left you. Not once did I ever hear you say thank you or anything like that to your father. How come now you're constantly talking about your father, you're donating money in his honor, everything? So the son says, I never understood how smart my father was until the money ran out. He forced me and forced me and forced me to learn that I should be able to have a job, that I should be able to be independent and take care of myself when the time would come. And I thought that I was going to be able to live off the riches forever, but it's the circle of life. Riches come, riches go. And now I have to work and make a living. And if it wasn't for my father forcing me and being smart enough to bribe me and do whatever he could to give me a good education, I wouldn't be able to survive. That's the importance of teaching our sons. It says in the Talmud that we are obligated to teach our son a profession. It says anybody who doesn't teach his son a profession, it's like he taught him how to be a thief, because he's going to have to eat, and he'll come to steal if he has no way of making a living. So important to teach our kids, get them a proper education, that they should be able to make a living in life. But I want to point out that the Torah here says in the Mishnah, Yafeh Talmud Torah im derech eretz. It's not one or the other. It's good with the other one. If you don't have derech eretz, Talmud Torah is not good. If you don't have Talmud Torah, derech eretz is not good. It's not enough to just work. You also have to have Torah study. A father shouldn't think, I send my kid to the school, it's enough that he just learns how to get a job and that's it, and I'll send him to the synagogue. No, he must invest in his Torah study. He must invest also in giving him a good Torah education. It shouldn't be that he says, when he's older, he'll learn, or if he's interested, he'll learn. No, just like you have to bribe and you have to hire tutors and you have to give all kinds of treats and encourage your kids in order that they should get a good secular education, in order that they can learn a livelihood, so too we have to use everything in our disposal. Bribe the kids, give them candies, give them treats, give them prizes. We have to hire tutors, we have to send them to the best schools, anything that we can also for their Torah education. And everything that we can do in order to ensure that they should be successful individuals in life, both in business and in Torah. And like this, they will live a good life. They will be able to support themselves, be independent, and be able to not have to depend on others, as well as to be upright individuals who are involved in mitzvot, involved in the community, caring about others, and involved in Torah study, raising good families. This is what we hope and we wish for our kids. Give everybody a beracha, a blessing, that you should be able to raise your kids and raise yourselves in Torah and mitzvot, and together we should be able to raise the next generation in Torah as we approach Shavuot and Matan Torah. Have a Shavua Tov and a great week.